initiative of our museums, the World Memory Project, and how we at the museum are helping those most affected by the Holocaust gain access to documents and information long denied them, and also about how you can help us in this process of getting these documents and information to those who need it most. Again, my name is Stephen Vito. I'm a researcher in a department at the museum called the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center. Our primary mission is to ensure that the individual experiences of survivors and victims of the Holocaust and Nazi-era persecution are recorded, preserved, and most importantly, disseminated in the easiest and most direct ways possible. Now, in doing this kind of work, as you can imagine, we have many challenges. The number of requests we get, which are growing every day, the amount of documentation that we have to search through, also growing every day. The fact that these collections, by and large, are not set up in a way that you can find individual names within them easily. And we also are challenged by the fact that we know that there are many, many other lists within our collections that we haven't even identified yet. But of course, our greatest challenge is racing against time to get these documents and information to survivors before the last of the generation passes. Now, for 22 years, I've been doing a job that, when I started, had only been done in a few places around the world and by very few people, working with limited and cumbersome resources. And even today, I would say that only a few places in the world support the few who do what I do. And that is having as my primary mission working with Holocaust survivors and their families to hopefully provide some details and documents about themselves or their loved ones during this dark time. Now, everyone knows the cliche that the Nazis, or those who were sent to death camps, these names were seldom, even if a record was made, it doesn't mean that that record can be easily found later in very different circumstances after the war. And such is the case with Nazi-era records on those they persecuted and did document. Back when I started, before the internet, before the scanning of original documents, before even an understanding of the magnitude of information within our large and growing archival collections, our process for helping these families was very slow going and emotionally very difficult, as you can imagine. First was always the conversation with the hundreds who came to us as soon as we opened in 1993. Now, archives are set up by where their documents are created. If you're in a city, then you were born there and raised there, you find documents by going to that place's archives and getting that information. They're organized by place. But if I'm going to help survivors and victims, families of the Holocaust, I've got to have the conversation and find out where they were from, where the persecution took place. And so I had to have that conversation about their families. Where was your family from? What were their names and dates of birth? Where were you separated from each other? Do you know where they were sent? When did you last hear from your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your best friend? And after having this conversation and noting the facts of it, began searching. First, we had to find a collection that may have information on that person. This is an example of something from our archives. It's a collection, post-war collection of the Central Committee of Jews in Poland, their Department of Education. After the war, they set up organizations that tried to educate children or people whose lives were disrupted and couldn't continue their education. They tried to start rebuilding their lives with education right after the war. So by default, this is a list of survivors. So dealing with a surviving family, if I had that information, this would be one that I would search. But first you have to identify a collection, then you got to go into it with microfilm, reels of microfilm. And on every reel are tens of thousands of documents. So we have to go frame by frame until we might come to a name list such as this one on the far right. And there's not even one list here. There's 5 lists on this one page, and they're not in any particular order. This is the state of the art for a long time. Over the years, we've enlisted mostly local volunteers in the DC area to take such name lists as you see to the right and enter them into databases name by name so that such buried lists of names can be brought to light and made searchable. One volunteer I have, he's great, he tries to put in 100 names into a database every day, 4 days a week. But in a year, he would ideally type in some 20,000 names. But with the World Memory Project, we have a game changer in our ability to get this information about people to the people that are needing it the most and in a timely manner. With the World Memory Project, we are engaging you, the public, to help build the largest online resource of information about victims of the Holocaust and Nazi-era persecution, Jews and non-Jews, and bringing this information to the world for free. Please watch this video.
It's easy to feel helpless when you think about the Holocaust and the widespread Nazi persecution during World War II. The World Memory Project gives you an opportunity to do something.
The museum's great and very successful at acquiring Holocaust records from all over the world. Ancestry.com has developed tools that make it easy for people to help bring these records online. You download one piece of software and you'll immediately be able to look at an image and start typing the names of the individuals on that document. And that information is saved in our database and made searchable to others.
63 years. He did not know what happened to his father. He didn't know how he died or where he died.
I was a boy, a 14-year-old boy, a 15-year-old boy. And my father went to work, and then we were in camp together, and then he got lost. I felt an enormous guilt. What if I didn't leave him? What if I stayed that night and he would be with us? Why did I lose my father after all these years of suffering and so close to being freed?
I received from the museum a document, and on the list was my grandfather's name, his date of birth, his place of birth, and a grave number. So he survived. He survived liberation. He was taken to a hospital in Wells, and he died 4 days later.
Now I know who my father is. It's not easier than I know, but at least I know.
Anybody could relate. If you were separated from the people that you loved and you did not know what was going to happen to them or what does happen to them, the fear, the dread, the agony of not knowing.
You may not have an ancestor who survived the Holocaust or who died in it, but you can participate in the World Memory Project. I was able to find so much information in these records. Not only did I learn the date and time of my grandfather's death, I learned where he had died and what he had died from. It made him into a real person for me, not a ghost of the past, someone that I had never met, someone that I was only told stories about. The fact that there were documents to prove that he had once lived and that he had died, that was an amazing find for me.
You okay with that? Your arms getting
So you can see the way it's set up, anyone, anywhere can do this type of indexing. You can do it for 5 minutes at a time to hours at a time. You can stop typing in the records and come back to it later in the day, week, or year. And as you can see, as soon as we launched the project in May of 2011, not only did many people visit our website, they joined us in indexing these names, exponentially increasing the number of people doing the work and exponentially increasing the names that are available and searchable, not just to me, but to anyone looking for missing relatives and facts about their past. Again, the information is now searchable for free, and it pertains to experiences of Jews and non-Jews, right now from at least 6 different countries during the war. You can learn more about this project and sign up to participate throughout the day in Parlor 2. I'll be in there, because every family who lost a loved one deserves to know this truth. Now, interestingly, we've seen the impact of this project spread in many different directions, sometimes unexpected directions. One teacher who's using this project and with her students who are doing this name-by-name indexing found that it had a great impact on them doing the indexing. The teacher wrote me the following messages from her students and from her participating in this project. As you can see, they were drawn deeper into this history that they were just studying in general in their class. They were put face to face with original documents of a Holocaust, unfiltered by other people's interpretations. And they felt rightly that they were doing something good and important for those families most affected by this history. And I had the personal experience of this with my 13-year-old son, right? He's not a fan of doing homework, but he does love using a computer. He had this assignment in a class, an English class, on doing good, people doing good, writing about an event, and people who did something about that to help the people involved. He was told to do 6 hours of research and turn in something. Again, he's not the biggest fan of doing that, but I asked the teacher if this project is something that would qualify, and the teacher said yes. So he had 6 hours, we had over a weekend, so we divided it up 2 hours a day. Now, the first 2 hours, it's hard to get used to. You're looking at documents in other languages, in his case, Polish, but all we're asking people is to pick out names, type those names into a database, and the database will start relating that. So the first 2 hours was kind of hard, but pretty soon he got the hang of the systems and doing this. And it was from one place, the Łódź ghetto, and towards the end of the first day, he saw documents made on this particular couple, first and last name. The next day, I didn't even have to prod him. He went right into the system, pulled it up, and he found his 2 names again, but this time a child was born to this couple in the Łódź ghetto. And records were made, just written down on scraps of paper. This is the nature of a lot of the records during the Holocaust. He kept going through these records, putting in names. He found another relative of his family, and he typed in that name. And as he went on, he found out a little bit more. Ration cards for the family, aid that they were able to get for the child, all the things that were rationed out during the war by the Jewish Council. But he got to know this family more and more as he went through, and by the end of the 6 hours, he completed it, he got an A. But more importantly, towards the last day, he turns to me and he says, "Dad, you know, I feel like I'm getting to know this family." And he wanted to do more, even beyond what was required of him. A great moment for many fathers. Now, for those searching for someone that they were long ago separated from, the impact can sometimes be actually uplifting. One day at the museum, Helen Brown left. They were trying to research documents on Helen's mother, Renata, in the middle. And Renata Abend was born in Dortmund, Germany in 1927. But a few years after the Nazis took over, she moved with her family to Tarnów, Poland. Of course, when the Nazis invaded Poland in September of '39, everything changed. Her parents were deported and murdered, and Renata, then a teenager, did hard forced labor in the ghetto there. She was eventually deported from Tarnów to many other camps and ghettos. Doing some research, as you can see here, we were able to find some information on Helen's mother, Renata. Here's a summary of information on Renata in her places of persecution. And we see that one of the first place that she was in was, after we found this and other documents, right in the museum, they were so excited, they called their mother from the museum in Australia. And during this conversation, she asked about a man that she had met in the Tarnów ghetto. This man had saved her, boy, had saved her life many times. And he actually became her first boyfriend. They were separated by deportation, but they promised to find each other after the war. And after the war, she did try, like many others, looking for him, but couldn't find out what happened to him. All she knew was his name, Carol Mahler, and doing some research, I was actually finding a record for a Carl Mahler, around the same age as Renata, and who was also in the Tarnoff ghetto around the same time that Renata. I was able to find a record showing that Carl had actually survived the war, and we can see here that he went to Canada in 1948. And doing a little more research and using our museum's unique registry of Holocaust survivors, I was able to locate Mr. Mahler still living in Canada. And I made that first incredible phone call to him. They were reconnected after all of these years. Though they weren't able to meet physically, she was in Australia and he was in Canada. Both learned how to use email just in order to write to each other. And they even spoke to each other using Skype. Now the three of us are Facebook friends. You can see on the bottom, Renata writes to him. She wrote her memoirs in a book and gave me a copy and sent him a copy. And here she says, "How did your family like the book? You are the hero." Now, in documents gave some closure to Saul Finkelstein, the father, finding out that though he was separated from his father, he found out that his father did survive the war, but had died in a hospital right after liberation. Saul told me that at least he knew that his father died surrounded by people trying to help him and not murder him. And though his father died, at least he knew where his father was buried, and the family actually took trips to Wels, Germany for that. And in the reunion story, we see how relationships torn apart by deportation can sometimes be reestablished even after 65 years. Now let me tell you a different type of story, and in fact show you through long hidden archival documents an incredible story of survival and resilience, a son's decades-long search for answers, a chance meeting at the Holocaust Museum, and then a renewed search and the stunning revelations that we were able to find and how it impacted a family across continents. Now, half of each day, I work at the museum in an office, but I come down and work in a public reference desk. You see here, where people going through our permanent exhibit or our museum in general, they can come, they can share their stories, and they can ask me about sources of documents on the friends of theirs who were in the Holocaust. And you know, we're one of the few places in the world, our Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where anyone can walk up and ask a researcher like me or my colleagues about documents and information and actually receive them on the spot. Now, one day, a lovely woman, Catherine Gorsuch, came to this desk, asking me about what I do, and bringing up the story of a dear friend of hers, who, with his father, a Holocaust survivor, and the sole survivor of the family, had long searched for information on their lost family. We exchanged general information, and she said she would find out more information, and we just parted. Now, I left my shift, and I was trying to go back upstairs to my office. I go into the elevator, and who do I see but Catherine Gorsuch again in this elevator. So we laughed, and she began to tell me more about her friend's father. I came to learn that her friend's father, born in Bending, Poland in 1927. And when the Nazis invaded Poland in September of 1939, Catskill was 12 years old and living with his father, Beryl, sometimes called Burl or Bernard in records. He was a welder, and he was living with his mother, Gipla. He was living with his sisters, Sarah, 11, Randla, 8, his brother Samek, and the youngest, Joseph, not 1 year old. Now, many Jews were killed in the Bending ghetto. Others, like Catskill, were sent to forced labor in various places, and most were. The Leichenberg family, like many, was broken apart. Catskill managed to survive forced labor and being sent to several ghettos and camps and then to Buchenwald, where he was liberated. In 1945, at the age of 18, he all alone leaves Germany and goes through France and Italy and England to arrive in what was then called Palestine. We see here on a passenger list, going to Palestine. And after beginning a new life in Israel and becoming a pioneer in Kibbutz Palmach, Yehaskiel, second from the right, writes his first letter asking about, the first of many letters, and inquiries about his father. Here's a copy of one of the letters that I found that he wrote in 1950. In part of the letter, he writes something that I've heard thousands of times. It says, "Since I was taken from my house by the Germans to a concentration camp in 1943, I have heard nothing about all of them," meaning his family. Here's a copy of the response that he received. It says, "Investigations are fruitless, without result." And on line 4, it says, "Case is closed." And yet, here's another handwritten letter. Here's another handwritten letter by Mr. Latenberg, this time written with the help of his family, this time in 1977. Here he says, "I have been searching for them since the end of the war." And here is yet another copy of another request that he made, this one done in 2010, with the help of his son, Avi, who lives here in the Miami area. And he was actually going through the local Red Cross, which has this tracing service made available to people. His son, by the way, of course, is the director of the Foundation for Holocaust Education Projects, headquartered here in the area. Now here is the response that they received, saying that they received all the previous requests, but that they were still unsuccessful in finding any information. Now after speaking with Catherine, and she's speaking to her friend Avi, and I working with both of them, I followed up and did my own search, now that I have direct access to these collections that they had asked others to search before. I was able to actually find a record on Yehaskiel's father, Barak, that they had been looking for so long. And the record on the left not only shows Barak surviving the war, something they did not know, but also the record on the right showing that, like his son Yehaskiel, Barak, now called Bernard, had left Europe on a ship in 1949, and he also went to Israel. Records were made, but neither father nor son had access to them, and so neither knew that each had survived, and that each had gone to Israel. Here's the actual record listing Bernard Latenberg going to Israel on his ship. So father and son were separated, both survived the war, both were living in Israel within miles of each other, inquiring about each other. Documents were reported for both going to Israel, but not didn't know this information. Me, having direct access to these records through the Holocaust Museum, I did know this now, and I shared this with the family. And this is the power of truth. This is the power of truth in your hands and in mine. This is the power of making names and information hidden in archives available to people directly. What you found in 1 week, my father could not find in 65 years. Yehaskiel Latenberg lived long enough to learn of this information, but unfortunately not long enough to have joined us here. He died in March of this year, 7 months after his beloved wife Zipporah had passed, and 67 years after he began building a new life for himself and his family, and all those that he was separated from during the Holocaust. Though he's not able to join us at this moment, I'd like to bring up his son, Avi, to talk about the impact this information has had on his father. your father's attempts from the beginning trying to find information about your father, but more about your father's mindset, especially in those early years in Israel.
First of all, thank you, Steve, for doing this amazing miracle, giving our family some kind of a closure. And I want to thank all my friends who came today to share this really incredible moment. You using our family story to show what the document actually can bring. As the document shows, when my father arrived in 1945, I think July 1945 in Palestine, he immediately, that's one of the first thing he did, he sent a search note, which I think you have in your archive, I think already as early as the end of 1945. And since then, he's been looking and looking and looking, and I had the privilege as a former director of the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach to aid a lot of survivors, connecting with families through other means, but always in the background wanted to give my dad this ultimate gift, connecting with one of his family members. And yes, we went to Poland, we brought him a gift, his birth certificate, and that was almost enough for him. Then we went again, we brought the family documents from the Beijing City record. But all the time, while he did not talk about his own personal story, we knew he was looking for anybody, any relative, any cousin, anybody, any connection linked to his younger life. And many times he told me that I might be sitting in a theater or in a bus station or on a bus, and maybe the person next to me might be my cousin, might be an uncle, might be a father. But with all that, with all this memory, with all this search, he, as you mentioned, you show his picture, he joined the Palmach at the age of 17, built a country, created a new kibbutz, a new family, and with all that, we were not aware of all this as young children. He managed somehow, like many other survivors, to deal with the memories, but create a new life for themselves and for create a new country. So we had the privilege, I wasn't there personally, and actually this little segment is being Skyped to Holland, where my sister is sitting and watching this segment. We had the privilege through my brother to give him the news, if we can call this incredible news, which he, and understandably so, refused to accept, in a way. He said it can be, it's impossible, but he lived long enough, like you said, to hear those news, even though we believe in a document, but for him it was, I think, a little bit too much to handle in this kind of a part of his life. And sadly, he just passed away a few months ago, and an incredible man who belonged to an incredible generation, just like many of the survivors here in the room. We salute you. We love you for your courage to stand up and tell your story, because it does make an impact and it does make a difference.
Can you talk a little bit more? What was the impact on your brother? You described your brother in a certain way. You just mentioned that story about how it impacted your brother.
My brother is a typical kibbutznik, if you're watching on the video later. That means that he's pretty cool, you know, like all his life is like kind of doesn't get too excited from too many things. And he had the job, the tough job, to get the package of documents, and now we have even more, to take it to my dad and my mom and dad at the time. And I told them, please, get them on a Saturday night or some quiet evening, just you and them, and kind of prepare them for the shocking news, and try to break the news to them in a kind of a nice, gentle way. And my brother, who doesn't really get excited from not too many things, somehow sparked up. But before we did that, we wanted to do one more thing. We wanted to get a final confirmation that this Barak Leitenberg did arrive in Israel. So I asked my brother, listen, go to the Ministry of Interior in Israel, in Jerusalem, and see if there's a record showing that this man actually entered Israel in 1949 and received, obviously, an Israeli ID card. I cannot tell you that my brother jumped like in 2 seconds on this mission, on this job, like I never seen him before. Within 3 days, we had the confirmation. He went to the Ministry of Interior. They would not allow him to take the file or make copies. There was one piece of paper in that folder. We have Barak Leitenberg name with another woman, as the document shows. And that was the final confirmation. And then he got my parents and kind of I told them a little bit of the story using the copy that I sent him. And he was going to be here today, actually. We were just that close to bring him over, but sadly, for my parents and me, he decided to start a family at the age of 54, so he had 3 kids at the age of 3. So that was kind of impossible. But my parents waited long enough, lived long enough to see the grandchildren and actually really even see my brother kind of taking ownership of this story and the documents that kind of supported this whole incredible miracle that you and Catherine kind of created for our family.
Like you just mentioned, they did some little bit of research into what happened to your grandfather. What were you able to piece together based on documents you found in Israel about your grandfather?
Also, it's an interesting, actually one of the things we found out that my grandfather lived in a place called Pardes Chana, which in the early days of Israel there was a lot of immigrants, refugee camps, if you can say that. And it's even more kind of, I don't know how to say it, but in the early days of Israel, nobody had cars, nobody had transportation. So basically, when you live in a place, especially like on the kibbutz, you're pretty much there and you can't go anywhere unless my father happened to be the truck driver of the kibbutz. And he, at least twice a week, would go to Haifa to bring grain from the port back to Jerusalem, and would pass by this little place called Pardes Chana at least once a week or twice a week, but he never knew that his father lived in Israel. And the document showed that his father lived in Israel for 10 years and then left. We had continued the search throughout all over the world with the help of Catherine and finding Leitenbergs that are not connected to our family, but somehow along the way the document kind of lost Barak Leitenberg. We can't find him again, but he left in Israel in 1958. And that's the thing that my father doesn't want to believe, that his father lived in Israel for 8-9 years and somehow not connected. So, well, it's kind of a tragic end or story in a way, but it's the work that you do, Steve, is really you and the people at the Holocaust Museum. You bring in those papers, those documents, those 60, 70 years old document into human stories that are incredible and are credible. And I can't thank you enough for choosing our family story for this one, but I've been involved with Holocaust survivors and, for the last 20-some years, and I could not wish nothing better for them than to link them with any of the families, even with a piece of paper, it would be enough. So the value of what you do, it's an incredible value and an incredible gift to the survivors. And to all the survivors here, don't give up until the last day, because, you know, my dad he he got those news like a year before he passed away. He waited 60, almost 70 years. And this folder contained over 100 documents that shows even the envelope, the copy of the envelope, when they sent it to the Red Cross, it's here. A little boy at 14, 15 years old, was looking for his father, for his family, since 1945, and finally, almost 7 years later, got the news. So don't give up, keep looking, keep searching, and the Holocaust Museum is a great resource, and I think the work that you do is just incredible.
Avi, thank you so much for that. We're out of time for this particular session. A couple of things I'd like to note. In Parlor 2, we have more information about the World Memory Project. Again, this is a way of getting these documents searchable by name and available to people directly. And one last thing I'd like to leave you with, a thought that studying the Holocaust, often we come up with the question of what we would have done in those circumstances. But with the Holocaust Museum, especially in our 20th anniversary, we're asking everyone to face the question, what will I do now with this knowledge? In your packets, we still have 20 suggestions about ways that you can preserve memory, to research, to get involved. And I hope that you'll take this to heart, this information and this history that we deal with. Enjoy the rest of the day here. We have many venues and many different types of presentations. Come to Parlor 2 for some research in World Memory Project. And don't forget to go to the tribute today at 4 o'clock for survivors and veterans. It's very important to see everyone there. Thank you.